I'll leave that open for now. The chat's just booting up, and then in a second I should see if everything's kosher. Right, initializing unified chat done. Ready to receive chat messages. In a minute it will appear on YouTube and Facebook, so if you refresh the page or whatever, you should be able to view it down there. In fact, I better turn my volume down.
Yeah, it's just I've just come up on the iPad.
Has it just come up as it? Yes, that's good.
Yeah, I can't see it on Skype there. All I can see is me. Is that?
Yeah, that's no. You won't be able to see me. You won't be able to see me. The only way you'll be able to see me is actually on the stream. How's it going, Ollie? How's it going?
Myself.
You what? Sorry.
That means I've got to look at myself.
You got to look at yourself. Awesome. Well, just keep your face planted to your phone or whatever. It's all good. But yeah, it looks like we're getting a feed anyway. Somebody's just joined us on YouTube, so we've got people on YouTube. So I'm just going to give it a minute for the Facebook one to start, and then once the Facebook one starts, which it's just coming on now. Yeah, there we go. I've got us up. I've got us up. Just. Actually, I won't hold it up because I'll probably pull my bloody thing in. It's like the Brummy Retro Show. Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Appreciate that, mate. And right, so anyway, evening, guys. It's now the 22nd of May, and we are well into lockdown season. Forget your plans for the rest of the year. You're going to be glued to your settees for the most part of it. I've been pretty cool about all this up until now. But I've got to be totally honest, I am starting to get sick of it now. It's become a little bit boring. You may have seen my post this morning about starting a cult. That's definitely something I want to do because I'm bored out of my tree and we've got to do something to kill the boredom. So if you want to join my cult, just sign up there. A few people joining the chat now. We've got Woody, we've got Mike, we've got Mark Griffiths. Hi guys, hope you're enjoying yourselves. Right guys, so what we've got planned for this evening. Right, we're back with Retrogaming Room 101. And we're now up to episode 4. I'm glad it lasted more than just one episode because I didn't know if this thing would really have legs, but people seem to have seen it so far and enjoyed it. And we've covered some interesting topics so far, and there hasn't been a lot we haven't consigned to Room 101 so far. But joining me this evening, I have Neil Wright, otherwise known as Spectrum Nez, on Facebook and YouTube. Say hello, Neil.
Hello.
There you go. Nice. Keeps it simple. And he's gone a bit fancier than the rest of my guests who usually just sit in their darkened basements or bedrooms, and you can tell this guy is completely about his Spectrum. You can tell by the funky background there. And I think with part of my subject, just after he's spoken, I might be upsetting him and a few Spectrum fans out there. So it's going to make for interesting conversation. So anyway, Neil has put forward a suggestion for Retro Gaming Room 101, and it's a topic I think quite a few of you out there will have opinions on. I've certainly spoken about it in the past, and I know it's something that is going to hold true to a lot of you out there, given a lot of our collective gaming roots, and it is this. It is modern arcades, and you can see I've kind of used an illustration there which sort of best kind of sums it up for a lot of us as to what modern arcades represent. But to tell you further then, I'm going to hand you over to Neil. So Neil, what is it about modern arcades that you want to see burned to the ground?
I absolutely despise modern arcades. It's I guess going back to the 80s when I was growing up, we used to go on holiday, to places where they had what I would term as proper arcades, so you go to Skegness, Blackpool, Great Yarmouth, and the excitement of seeing, walking down the street and seeing the massive banners, neon lights outside an arcade, and you could hear stuff going on inside, and you walk in and, the sounds, first of all, when you go in there. So, I can remember walking in, you hear, diddle-diddling, Dragon's Lair, and you think, oh, what is going on in here? This place is amazing. And you've got all those just fantastic things in there where it's not just about taking money off you. It was about having fun as well. So there was a small arcade on one of the sites that we used to stop at, the Blue Sky Caravan Park in Great Yarmouth had an on-site arcade, and I used to look forward to going there as basically, a major part of my holiday. So I'd save money up before we went, specifically to spend the evenings in the arcade, playing on the games and getting better. And I talked to my friends about it before I went on holiday to find out, had they been on holiday anywhere? What games could I expect to see there? Have they got any tips on what skills I could, employ on these games? And you go there and you just spend hours in these arcades and playing games, learning all the tricks about it, and then and I guess it's the social aspect of it as well, because you'd go in there and you'd end up. There were some bullies in the Great Yarmouth one, but I've made friends in arcades, where you meet up night after night and try and get a bit further than the guy before, and it wasn't just about taking money and turning kids into gamblers, I guess, and then we'd come back home after the holiday, and I'd discuss it with my mates at school, saying, I've seen and played the most amazing game on holiday, Space Harrier, Outrun, Spy Hunter, whatever, and then in a smaller sense, I guess, in the town where I'm from, Derby, there was small arcades there, and even inside record shops and things like that. But there were proper arcades where you would go and have a social time with people, and you'd chat, and if you were old enough, smoke fags and drink and whatnot, and play the games. But these days it's just they trick me. That's what annoys me a lot of the time. I think is I feel tricked. So I see an arcade and I get the same feeling of excitement to think, an arcade. Drag my family in, and you go in, and it's just OXO biffer machines to take your money off you.
Yeah.
It's pick a ball up, try and grab a cuddly toy, put as much money in this machine as you can to get tickets to get some Chinese tata off a shelf that is from Poundland or something, And all it is just kids ploughing money for no reason. There's no enjoyment. There's no skill. There's just absolutely, there's just no redeeming features for them at all. And and like I say, I get excited when I see an arcade, but I'm always disappointed. And I just feel like it's they just need to be destroyed, because it's just it destroys my memories of a major part of my holidays and a major part of my growing up, a major part of the gaming when I was growing up. Being in arcades, and some of my favourite games are arcade machines, Outrun Spectrum, etc., Outrun Space Harrier, etc. Just fantastic. And they were things really I could only play in an arcade on holiday, because the smaller arcades didn't have them. You'd have to go to the places where they got the big ones. But what do you get these days? It's nothing. It is just give us your money and get nothing in return, and I absolutely despise it. I just hate it. So
when do you think was probably the first time maybe that you realised that the arcades of old had gone? Is there a point in your mind where you remember being drawn in like sirens in the mist and thinking, I can't wait to hit the arcade, and then you walked in and bam, you're punched in the face, metaphorically speaking?
Yeah, so I guess there's a period of time where I didn't visit arcades because I was busy with work and life.
Being an adult, yeah.
But, yeah, basically, yeah. But then when I had a child, that sort of came back. So I thought, oh wow, he can, when he gets a bit older, he can experience the same things I experienced. Play these games and remember the music, remember the attack waves and all that kind of stuff. And so taking him into an arcade, expecting him to experience the same. The same amazing things that I used to experience, and just being presented with, garbage.
Well, garbage. I mean, do you think then? I mean, you can speak comparatively now. Part of that wonder, I mean, I always felt that, like when we were younger, and we walked into these arcades, we were growing up in the birth of the technological age, and electronic entertainment was becoming more commonplace. It was seen more as a kid's thing. But we weren't exposed to it as much on a daily basis, I suppose, as the generations are now. Do you not think maybe that, your sons, for example, do you not think they get the same sense of wonder purely by walking into an arcade and it being full of glitz and glamour and neon lights and things like that? Because a lot of the arcades I've seen now, I understand what you're saying, but a lot of the arcades now, if you look at any of the ones by like Raw Thrills, who are one of the few people still making dedicated proper arcade games, their arcade machines are more flashy in a way than the ones we experienced, which were by comparison relatively dull cabinets, you know, just painted cabinets. You know, a lot of the arcades I went to, certainly, we never got the original machines. We had chip shop specials with that faux wood grain all over the sides. You know what I mean? A lot of them got, like, you know, fully internally lit seats and chasing neon lights and everything around them. Do you not think that your kids get that same sense of wonder from a modern arcade?
I think probably initially when they see that kind of stuff, yeah, but it's about what's going on inside that cab, you know. So, you know, just take it again, for example, Wonder Boy in Monsterland. You know, I know almost every note in the tune to that off by heart. You know, I can play it through my head. I know where all the secrets are because it was a game that I could go in and put 20 pence in and play for 30 minutes, you know, which was not only great value, but it involved skill and learning, you know, and learning where things were. Whereas a lot of the stuff I see now, although it might look glitzy, it's designed to take a quid off you and then game over as quick as possible. You know,
I think
doesn't seem to be any substance.
No, I think you're right there. I mean, you do have to remember that, you know, when arcades were originally made, I mean, yes, you know, games were starting to become a thing. They were the test beds, and at the time, the arcade was the pinnacle of gaming performance. You know, you couldn't get anything like that at home, and for 2 decades at least, the arcades certainly reigned supreme. So you saw the new genres appear there. You saw the new franchises appear there. A lot of the home gaming companies that made systems for the home systems, they basically got their inspiration entirely from the arcades. But you got to remember that when arcades first came about, the aim was still the same. We kind of feel like we're being ripped off a bit more now. But you got to remember that, like, when these games were made, the point was the same. They were designed to take as much money out of your pocket as possible, and perhaps because there weren't as many people making such fancy things, or maybe building the electromechanical things was so expensive back then, the video arcades was just something that we happened to cotton on to, and we were drawn in by gameplay and playability and things like that. Is it so different now? I mean, it's a fact that, okay, nothing in the arcades now has got staying power, but they made great games in order to keep us in the arcade, whereas now they make games and kind of dupe you into thinking you're getting more reward from it by making everything redemption based, you know, tickets, bigger, flashier displays on screens. Just for it's a bit like free to play mobile games where you get big golden explosions of coins on the screen when you've achieved the tiniest thing to kind of lull you into this sense of security and lure you into think you're actually achieving something. They're doing a lot of the tricks they're doing now are very similar to what they did with us. It's just that we were from a simpler generation where we were drawn in by video screens playing games we couldn't get at home. So I don't know if you can actually argue that one quite as much, but I think you've got a point when it comes to the longevity. You know, it was a different time, it was an experimental time, and the games that we were drawn in, I'm under no misconception that we were being ripped off, because I would go into an arcade. I mean, when I started in the arcades, I remember games being 10 pence. 10 pence was the first video game cost. And, you know, we didn't have an arcade, especially in the Midlands. I mean, you're from the Midlands yourself. In the Midlands, we didn't actually have many inner city arcades that you could frequent. So most of our exposure would be on holiday destinations or bank holiday destinations. I know, being from the Midlands, places like Stourport, you know, had arcades by the fair. When the fair came to town, they would always bring an arcade with it. But we didn't actually have that many in the pubs and places like that. My only exposure to them tended to be working men's clubs, or the odd chippy would have them, or some very, very seedy local arcades. We had 2 in our town, and you know, that they were very seedy. And make no mistake, you knew you were being ripped off. If you weren't being mugged on your way in, you were being mugged in the games, because they would often dial the difficulty way up to 10, and you know, you'd be there pumping that money away. And even at 10 pence a throw, a quid wouldn't last you long. And when I'm a young kid and you're given a quid on holiday, go down the arcades, you're expected to whack that in the change machine, break it down to 10 goes, and you just, you know, that would soon disappear. If you played some of the very early classics, they were like 1 credit, 1 go. And once you got good, you could have a game which could last you 10 minutes or so. You know what I mean?
But, yeah, well, I used to go down Derby Town with my mate Tim, and we had Midnight Resistance down there with the twin stick, and I got to the point on that where I could finish it on 1 credit. So we'd go down, and I'd spend a good 30-40 minutes on that. But that, and although that, like you say, it's designed to take money off you, that initial money that I spent gave me the skill to learn where things were and get to the point where I could finish it on 1 credit. So I could go down on a Saturday. And have a right good old game on it for 10p or 20p, whatever it was. Whereas if you go into an arcade today and you play on, if there is a game there, they mostly seem to be like a big gun mounted on top of some device, and you basically just got no chance. And I've played them with my lad, and no matter how many times we play it, you never seem to get any further.
You don't get any better. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Waves of there's no skin involved. It's just
yeah. There's definitely been a difficulty curve change when you start moving from the golden age into the silver age. That difficulty level thing became more noticeable because once games started arriving where you could continue your game where you left off, the difficulty seemed to shoot through the roof. You couldn't imagine playing something like I don't know, say Commando, for example, right? That's still pretty early game. You couldn't imagine playing that game through from start to finish on the arcade, even on its average difficulty on 1 credit. It was designed from the off to only allow you to get so far. And and I understand what you mean. With a bit more practice, you could get that little bit further. An example I always give is I was a big fan of the kind of side-scrolling brawlers. I love things like Double Dragon, Final Fight, Turtles, things like that.
Final Fight.
And it was quite easy to gauge your performance based on that. But you knew when you put your first credit in, you would never continue somebody else's game, because if they were quite a way into the game and you put your credit in, even though you got a chance of completing the game, you knew that 10 pence was going to disappear very fast. You would let that timer reset and you would start from the start, because you knew, for example, on Final Fight, on 1 credit, you could probably get past the first level, beat the end of level 1 boss, and get some way into the train stage before you actually died. But that was about as far as you got. With a bit more practice, you could get a bit further. I think in recent years, I've tested it a bit further, and I could get as far as Sodom in the Ring on 1 credit. But that was pushing it, and that was assuming you went to arcades where they didn't whack the difficulty level up. If you ever go now and mess around with MAME, I don't know how much experience you've got, but if you start looking at the dip switch settings for a lot of games, even the early games, they are very much like the dip switch settings you would have seen on fruit machines. They're mainly aimed around credits. The difficulty options would generally be medium, hard, or harder. There'd be no easy setting, you know what I mean? And very few of them had like a free play or a tournament play option. So that they were always designed to rip you off in a way. But yeah, I mean, I suppose because it was an emerging generation, we certainly spent more time in there trying to get good at the games we enjoyed, because it was the first kind of time we'd seen those games and we knew those skills would carry forward to the games we were playing at home. Once I started to bring that arcade experience home, what you learned there, you could then bring back home with you and transfer those skills to anything. It's especially true once you get to the fighting game era. When the Silver Age really started to taper off and the Street Fighter 2 came out. It was purely based, as long as you could win a match, you progressed to the next match and you were on level ground again. You started with full energy bars against a new opponent, and the better you got, you could go through and beat those games on 1 credit if you got really good. But the continuing thing was always there, eking at you, that if you got beat, it was just teasing you, as if to say, haha, you're dead. Come back and try again, do you know what I mean? There's always been those things there. I find it can be a bit hard to criticise that modern games try to rip you off, because they clearly do, and I understand what you're saying. Rambo is a good example. There's been a few others of around the same era as that. There was an Alien game, I think it was based on Alien Resurrection, which used the big massive guns as well, and that was very similar. You could never really get any further. The later Time Crisis games were certainly like that. That was at the very end of the classic era, and I know what you mean. And there's these big grand games now. What you see a lot of now when you do see games, one good example is that Transformers game. I don't know if anybody here has seen it, but it's basically an in-cab shooter like Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Instead of standard guns, you've got these turret-mounted gun things, and it's based on the Transformers movies. And I played that through with my nephew. I think it was at Drayton Manor Park, actually, about 12, 18 months ago. And we had a few games of that. And on each successive turn, I know exactly what you mean. You would always get to the same point, and when you were taking damage, you couldn't see where you were taking the damage from. It's almost as if it was slowly sapping your energy, moves that you couldn't defend against. So your energy was going to go no matter how well you performed, and you're fully locked onto them. So I know exactly what you mean. It's a tough call. I think we'll and have a
yeah, that is even if you're lucky enough to find a modern arcade with a game like that, and a lot of them are literally just gambling or money takers. You might have one big gun-mounted shooting game in the corner, but a lot of them I haven't even got that. It's literally just ticket, and go and get your Chinese tat. It's and I see that Gareth in the comments there. I used to live with him years ago. We had a Street Fighter 2 arcade machine in the house that we lived in together, and I used my skills from playing that before then to play in the house, and going back to the 80s of all the skills I learnt on Patland, Wonder Boy, all those games there. When I go to Revival or to play Blackpool, all those skills still work. It's exactly the same, and regardless of whether the game is ramped up in difficulty or not, there's still a game there.
Yes, There's definitely a game. I think there's a lot more longevity to be seen in terms of actual video games compared to a redemption machine. A redemption machine is more likeable to it's kind of going back to old carnival tricks, because what they're doing is they're enticing you in with a game of it's not even true skill, it's pseudo skill, and that's a term that's used a lot in the fruit machine circles. I don't know if you ever really while we're on the subject, a lot of arcades, like you say, now tend to be full of fruit machines. Even that's true to an extent, but a lot of those have started to disappear now. I remember heavily playing. I don't know if you did, but when I was younger, I used to always love a go, obviously on the video games. But they used to have like the low jackpot fruit machines, especially at the seaside. You'd have the £3 and the £5 jackpot machines, and you were allowed on those as kids. And I would occasionally go and throw a quid in one of those. And as an adult, I'll be honest, once I got to my proper adult years, I used to love a go on the fruit machines. And me and my friends, again, it adjusted. You used to be able to play the old mechanical fruit machines, and you could learn the tricks, and you could learn how to recognise the signs, and you could learn how to empty one under the right circumstances. But I think with those, because you knew it was a gambling machine, you're under no illusion they are ultimately designed to rip you off. But there's definitely been a change, and the more modern machines now, the fact that every single fruit machine has got a note acceptor on the front, which wouldn't never have happened back in the day. There were spaces for note acceptors, but nobody was throwing £5, £10 notes in. And it's very rare now I'll go near a fruit machine, because they've changed in such a way where you just have to put as much money in as you can. And instead of them paying out their percentage, most of them have got like a 70% payout or something like that. Instead of paying those in smaller wins, what they'll tend to do is nobody will win, and then one person more frequently will win like the big jackpot, if you know what I mean. So there's no real attraction to going on them, and I think the design is to hook the gamblers who only ever go after the jackpots to read the signs badly, go on thinking it's going to pay out, and then they'll throw good money after bad, trying to get that jackpot, because they know that's the only thing that's going to pay out on there. So I understand exactly what you're saying there. Did you ever play the fruit machines when you were younger?
Did what? Sorry, Craig.
Did you ever play the fruit machines when you were younger?
Only, like I said, just the simple ones. When I went to university, I got into a really bad habit of playing fruit machines every day, and I got myself in a bit of bother with that. But it was what you mentioned. Just I'd lose money, and then I'd throw good money after that, trying to get some money back again. And it's a very difficult street to get out of once you've got in that kind of position. But I'm still not a big fan of them. And when I used to work in a pub back in Derby, what you say about the machines giving signs and things, I used to be able to watch the machine in the corner, watch people playing it, and when it did certain things, like there would be a certain part of it that would change a certain colour, I think, oh, that's ready for paying out then. So then you could go over with a couple of quid and empty it.
Yeah.
But like I say, I don't even think you see that anymore. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, you just throw the money. I understand what you mean. So regarding the other machines, then, I mean, it's always, but like I say, this whole carnival tricks thing, this pseudo skill. There were always things like teddy grabbers in an arcade. There were always things like the ski ball. Even some of the bigger arcades, especially like in the seaside towns, would have the like the 9-pin bowling or something like that, which was like a couple of quid to play. And those are experiences you can only kind of get there. Do you not welcome those kind of things?
Well, I think that's okay as long as it's a distraction. I guess that's more for the younger kids, really. Because they want the cuddly toys or the little gifts that it gives. But I don't mind that as long as it's a side distraction from a proper arcade with proper games where people are socialising and having fun and I can remember people crowding around Dragon's Lair and cheering and hollering and whooping when somebody got past a certain part, and that's something that you just don't see anymore. People cheering somebody on it,
encouraging somebody,
or in the right direction. Yeah,
it is strange because we've now got these weird hybrid machines now, and even some of the big companies are guilty of it. Obviously, Sega's fortunes over the years have changed, but they started to go back towards the arcades once they stopped building hardware. And over the last 20 years or so, they've made a lot of things using Sonic or any of their franchises, which are strange combined game redemption machines where it's either a cash payout or a ticket payout thing. Do you not find any value in those?
I would rather just put my money in, have a game that feels fair, and walk away knowing that I've had some enjoyment, rather than the urge that I've got to put some more in to get something else out of it,
to get back what you've already put into it.
Yeah, basically, or something, like you say in Redemption, a pack of cards or a bouncy ball or something.
I suppose. Right, well, we've had a bit of a chat ourselves about that now, so let's have a quick look at the chat, and I'm going to scroll back a little bit because people have got some quite strong opinions on this subject. So let's roll. Oh God, there is a few. Fair few chats here, so I'm going to go right back. So, starting back, Alan Chang. Unfortunately, most amusement arcades took on these machines to make money back. Yeah, I know they did, mate. That has always been clear. The same was always true with video games, though. That is part of the reason it's so hard to find a true classic, especially in the UK, where we rarely got the original machines, because when a machine was bought, the second it stopped being profitable, because don't forget they all had credit counters in the bottom, they could see how well a game was performing, whether someone stood at it for any kind of length of time or not. The second it stopped being profitable and it stopped counting those coins coming in, it'd be converted into whatever the latest cheap jammer PCB the arcade owners managed to pick up wanted to be, or they wouldn't even change it at all. They'd just butcher the control panel and make for such a horrible franking panel or something like that made any game you played after that play like absolute crap. So Ollie said these days you can play better games on your Xbox. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, was something I was kind of getting at. There was definitely a time there where the arcades, the pursuit of trying to play like the arcades was an aim of console manufacturers from the very beginning, but it wasn't until the best example I can think of where it actually overtook, I'm sure there's other examples, but Tekken, the jump between Tekken 3 and Tekken Tag Tournament, the reason being that on the arcades, Tekken, when the PlayStation, it's pretty evident by then that the home consoles had caught up with the arcades, but they weren't, they were still just a little bit underpowered compared to the arcades. However, the System 11 arcade hardware is based on the PlayStation hardware, and that was what they put Tekken 2 and 3 and Tag Tournament onto, and that they basically made all those games on the System 11 hardware, so it was basically a PlayStation 1. However, you knew the time had come because they didn't release Tekken Tag on the PS1 because the PS1 wasn't quite powerful enough to do it. Instead, they released Tekken Tag on the PS2. So for the first time, the actual home, as a direct comparison, the home version was better than the arcade. You know, the PS2 obviously had far better drawing capabilities, could handle more polygons, they had better soundtracks and everything, and that was the first time I crossed over. So yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. But yeah, once the kind of home consoles took over, you can go way back with this. I mean, even some of the better 8 and 16-bit consoles, they started to be able to get home ports that were as good as the arcades, or felt or played as well as the arcade games. I suppose the arcades were in decline. I mean, in America, the arcades began to decline in the very early 80s. You know, only a couple of years after they began. In the UK, by the time I was in there regularly, the arcades were already seeing a decline. You know, and the only thing that brought them back was the fighting game era. You know, of the 90s. So you can argue that at that point people chose not to go to the arcades. So people are as much to blame for this as the arcade owners were. You got to remember, some of the earliest arcades we went to, as rose tinted our specs are, playing devil's advocate here, as I talked about, so especially the inner city arcades, they were very rough places. I'm sure you've been to a couple yourself.
Well, yeah, you know, like I said, the one I went to in Great Yarmouth, I got bullied in. But the places in Derby that I used to go to, some of those were pretty rough. And there was a couple of them that were in social clubs, you know, and we used to go and play them. But I think, you know, the key behind, for me, that sort of verifies my thought on all this is when I take my lad to an event where they've got arcade machines, so either revival or play, you know, we play games there, the arcade games, and it's almost like being back in the 80s, you know, because we just have a right old laugh, you know. His face like sort of if we're playing hypersports against each other, or, you know, and the enjoyment I can see in his face playing that is the same kind of thing that I felt that we just don't feel anymore, you know. And it's nice because you've got that social aspect. So although the home machines, you know, can do better now, you just miss out on that social aspect of, you know, being with other people. And, you know, I know people can come round, but it's different to going out and saying, oh, all right, what's your name? You know, how far you got? I'm going to have a go next, you know. And that whole thing it was almost like a little social club for teenagers, really, you know.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you've not been to Arcade Club yet, have you?
I haven't yet. No, I've got it on the list to do this year, but obviously.
Right, I mean, no one will argue the fact. It's a fantastic place. Any of the arcade clubs are fantastic places, but you do have to kind of remember, and I mean, it's a great thing as far as us who've grown up and got kids and whatever are concerned, is that don't you think we've been able to take the best of it? I mean, these places are fantastic. You go in there, they're perfectly safe. There's no money flying around, so there's no danger of people being mugged or ripping each other off or whatever. You've got, you've got good people serving, you've got security and things like that. Don't you think, in a way, that when it comes to the modern arcades, they've made to be more family friendly? When really, back in the day, we needed that more because more kids were dragging parents into arcades back then to play the best games they possibly could. And some of the only places we really had access to were absolute dives with, you know, like you say, fag burns on everything, people drinking and smoking in there, and some quite unsavoury characters. I mean, don't you think that modern arcades maybe have got that part right? I mean, Arcade Club is a rare example because they've been able to pick and choose and control the environment based on that knowledge of, you know, what arcades do now compared to what they did then. Yeah, they've got the great games, but don't you think they're taking a good part of the modern arcades by making them a safe environment?
Yeah, I know. You can't argue against that. You know, if it's a safer place for everybody, then, you know, I'm all for that. And I guess, you know, yeah, modern arcades do seem safer because, apart from anything else, they've got lights on. Whereas a lot of places, you know, used to go to very dark and dingy. But, you know, but again, I guess that ties in with it being, you know, something that I just, although I'm all for the family stuff, you get in there and it's family friendly and stuff, but then there's no substance, you know. It's just, you know, give us your money again. So I guess I've not been to the arcade club, so I don't know. But it sounds like that's got the best of both worlds. So you've got what I want, which is the games, you know, and the music and the skills and the graphics and, you know, all those things that I love, along with, you know, the decent people that are going there because that's what they want to do, not stab somebody and take the money off them.
Yeah. Well, going further down the comments, we'll wrap this up shortly, but I'm going a bit further down the comments now. Ollie Paul Cole says, most arcades these days are ticket machines or one-arm bandits. Yeah, they certainly are. We've definitely covered that. Just looking what else there is. Sorry, there's a lot. Woody says, grab machines, he hates them. I mean, those things in themselves, have you seen how hard it is to win any kind of cuddly toy off one of those?
Yeah, I mean, they are the most fixed things I've ever seen. You can stand in front of one of them and put pound after pound in and get the claw in almost the exact same position every time. And then when you put about 50 quid in, it will clamp and not let go.
And what's so bad about those? Obviously, an unscrupulous arcade owner can easily modify one of those to make it even more, you know, unruly, because they can add weights to the things you're picking up. They can make the barriers that you have to pull them over to drop down the chute higher. They can adjust the crane claw quite easily. Those are one of the biggest rip-offs, and also one of the biggest pulls on the front of a lot of arcades. You look at a lot of seaside arcades, the grabbers are out the front. 9 times out of 10, they're out the front.
They'll have the toy from the latest, you know, whatever's on TV or something that's, you know, noticeable for people.
Pokemon was one of the biggest ones. Always the Pokemon toys at the front for years now. Ollie said, the best 2 arcade experience he ever had was playing Star Wars in the arcades in the 80s because you felt like an X-Wing pilot, and Battlezone because you had to look through the goggles. Yeah, I mean, arcades were definitely trying to do the whole environmental thing very early on, and those are 2 really good examples. The cockpit cabinet design was something that it fell off for quite a few years. I mean, I think there was a big gap between like things like Star Wars and then like much later, like say the one I mentioned there was Jurassic Park: The Lost World, where you had the internal cabin, you were supposed to be inside the Jeep, and they had the surround sound and stuff in there. You didn't have that for quite a long period there. So yeah, I can appreciate that's something, and that's a memory a lot of us really want to hang on to. You know, those machines, there's nothing quite like them now.
No, the deluxe versions of Space Harrier and Outrun are my 2 favourites of that. And there was something, I can't remember what it was, but there was like a weird space plane flying one, and it was like a 360 device. You sat in it and it just spun you all the way around, and people would get off it and vomit and things, but I don't know what that was. The game looked like Afterburner, but in a 360 spinning circle thing. Weird.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. It was the I'm trying to think of it. It's the R360 is the actual name of the model. I can't remember. What was it? A version of Afterburner that was in there? I can't remember, but yeah, it was. I know the one you mean. And it's
I never had a go because I think it was about £3 a pop, so I never had a go on that.
Yeah, well, it was like the virtuality machines. I only ever saw those in 2 places. One of them was actually at Alton Towers. As you came out of the Black Hole roller coaster, they used to have 4 virtuality machines on link up outside as you went through the exit section before you went and got your picture and whatever off the ride. So I remember playing them there, and I think at the time they were £2 a go, and I thought that was too much. You know, they weren't even using operators then. They were quite beat up at that point. Just what we were saying there, Gareth said, modern arcade games cost about £2 for 2 minutes. One thing I did note actually is I don't think that the cost of the actual games has scaled proportionally over years. I mean, with inflation, you understand it. 10 pence became 20 pence, 20 pence became 30 pence, and then it kind of jumped to 50. And then next thing you know, there were £1 and 2, more and more frequently now, £2 for a go in a lot of arcades. Even places like Blackpool are guilty of that. Coral Island, which is a fantastic arcade, it always has been. I like the way it's themed. They tend to get the latest games. The price of the few video games they've actually got left are quite shocking, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the only one really I ever drop any money on is the rare that you see it around, but you normally see Outrun 2 in some places.
Yeah,
and that's basically £2 because it's you'll find the dual machine. So me and my lad will have a go, and that's £2. But again, you feel like you've had a good game on that.
Yeah, that's a different story. When you're paying for the more, I think that's why they've tried to make these games bigger and more showy, because they think if it's bigger, it looks like it's worth more money. I understand. It's another old tactic.
Yeah.
But Mr. Butler there questioning my terminology. When I say video arcade, I'm specifically referring to video game arcade machines. An amusement arcade is the place you go, yeah, and that is the correct terminology, yeah. An arcade, as we refer to it, a place, is an amusement arcade. Woody says, has the stream frozen for anyone else or just him? Well, we seem okay here, mate. I think there's a few problems with it going out live, but it seems pretty solid here. And I'm watching it back on Facebook, and it seems pretty solid. So we are having a few dropped frames, but nothing major. Alan Chang says he was from London, so he had access to all the arcades back in the 80s in Soho. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Whenever I used to watch things like Games Master, or when they started doing the gaming TV shows, they would refer a lot to arcades and say you can go down to a local arcade and experience this. And outside of London, you didn't, and obviously the seaside towns where they didn't have that much money to spend on getting the big arcades, we never used to get access to much. As like I say, much of my exposure, and I'm going well to the end of the 90s here, I never got to play on a lot of those really big flashy machines. I mean, you mentioned Dragon's Lair. I never remember seeing a Dragon's Lair in operation anywhere but one place in all my travels, because most of the games I played tended to be Electrocoins, the generic two-player, single-player, two-player, those wood grain little cabaret machines. Cocktail cabinets were really popular in the UK. Something the Americans never really got that, but the cocktail, you used to see a cocktail quite often in like working men's clubs, because it was a convenient way to have an arcade when you could sit your point on top of it, and sit at the machine, I remember my dad used to work at British Steel. He used to work at the Seamless Tubes in Wolverhampton, and they had two arcades. They had an upright, which was a really battered jammer cabinet, and they had a cocktail sat right next to it, and we used to hang out there the whole time. I remember playing Ring King, Rygar, Terra Cresta. Rygar, yeah. I remember that was the first place I played that. They had Double Dragon for a while, and I was gutted when we lost that one. But yeah, it was the cocktail arcade is something that was definitely lost. So Alan, you were lucky, really, mate. Outside of London, us poor inner city kids, we had no chance. I'm not making up place names, Mr. Butler. Stourport is a popular place round here. It's Stourport-on-Severn, which is it's a nice place because it's on the river. It's got quite a famous iron bridge over it, and everyone goes out on the bank holidays round here. It's a really popular place. A lot of arcades, a permanent fair on there. It's pretty cool. He said Liverpool had some great arcades. Plus, he was old enough to go into the pubs. Well, obviously, you worked in the industry. I'm sure you had a few hookups anyway. Then you had Southport up the road with shitloads of arcades. Yeah, I think Southport's actually a bit of an example of what I was saying. Southport was never the nicest place in the world, and I'm sure there were more than a few seedy arcades in Southport. From the Midlands, a lot of us used to go up to Rill back in the day, and going to Rill was quite an experience because there were some seriously dodgy arcades there. Ollie says he grew up in pubs, so he used to play the games they had in there. Best day of his life was when the guy who serviced the machine noticed he was there and gave him 99 lives on the boxing game. Quite a few places used to do that. I used to work at a bowling alley round here, and we actually had a Sega Zone installed in there at one point. But they had a small arcade in the main section, and when the guys from Maygay used to come in to service the fruit machines and collect all the money, they would rack up the credits, because during the day we were bored in that place. And I used to play Crazy Taxi a lot in there, and the boxing machine as well. Your friend Gareth said, whatever happened to that Street Fighter 2 machine they had on number 73?
Yeah, that's where we lived in Normanton in Derby. We had I think we had Street Fighter 2 machine and just a standard fruit machine, but no idea what happened to it. Happy days they were. And we had a pool table as well. It was an awesome house. That
you got lucky.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned air hockey tables. You know what? Air hockey tables, I've actually got quite a lot of love for. They're a good thing to have a thrash around with. with family members or your pissed friends. You know what I mean? It just tends to be that kind of thing that you do. You know, the air hockey table is always popular. It's like the football table. You know, when you see one, you tend to just walk up and have a go. You know.
Yeah, I like the air hockey tables. There's a Pac-Man themed one where you something happens on it. I don't know what it is. But
it's got certain modes, hasn't it? It gives you like I've seen that. I think like it reduces the air on the one side of the table and it doesn't return the puck as quick and things like that. Yeah, they're getting quite tricky with those. I quite like those. There's a Sonic themed one as well. I was on about Sega. They do one just like that. Gareth said he used to love his driving games like Monaco GP and Sega Rally. And Ollie asked if you remember Enduro Racer. Asked Gareth if you remembered Enduro Racer. Did you come to Revival 2018 or 2019? One of our arcade collector friends there, he brought his fully restored Enduro Racer to that, and that was an absolute joy to play on.
I love Enduro Racer. It's just great. And the speccy version of that was pretty cool too.
Simon Butler says, part of the attraction of the old arcades was the feeling that it was somewhere slightly unsavoury, somewhere you shouldn't be going into. You know what? I think it's just that we were made of tougher things when we were younger. I mean, there was an arcade in Bilston by me, and my friend's mum owned the cafe just down from it, and we used to go there on a Saturday, and we would wash up in the kitchen, we'd clean up, she'd give us a few quid, and we go up the road to an arcade that was supposed to be over 18s only. But the way they were designed, what they'd done is the front of it was like a CD, you know, kind of like a Quicksilver arcade, you know, with all the standard fruit machines in. And they cleared out their back storeroom, and in the end they made that into the gaming arcade. So it would have made more sense really if that was at the front, because that way they could have let kids in. But because they were technically an arcade, it was supposed to be over 18s only. But he did used to let in certain local kids, and there was a couple of friends we had in Bilston, and obviously ourselves. His mum had a word with the arcade owner and said, "Listen, they're bored on a weekend. Can they come in here?" So, and that was where I got a lot of arcade memories from. We used to play in there. They used to have. That was the first place I played Street Fighter 2 on a 3-button arcade machine, which was
that's awesome.
It was so well. Obviously, everything was JAMA prior to that, so. Most games were 3 buttons, 6 buttons. It was just unheard of. The only thing that had 4 buttons were Neo Geo machines, and I never realised that for many years either. But yeah, they had Street Fighter 2 on a 3-button machine, so all you could do was punch. And so you'd pick a character where all their moves were punches, like Blanca or Honda, and you could quite satisfactorily play the game. We used to complete it like that. But then you'd try and be the other character, and you'd be like, why can't I kick? You didn't click to start with. As to why we couldn't kick, and this is before we learned about it in the magazines and things like that. And then he got Champion Edition on a 6-button machine, and it was a cheap arcade, but there were so many good games in there. They had Commando in there. They had one called, I think it's Violence Fight. It's a really strange, large character fighter. Trying to think of all the other games they had in there. One game they did have in there was Splash. Have you ever seen Splash?
No.
Next time you go to MAME, have a look for Splash, and it was a game that was in there, and me and my friend completed it. I'm not going to spoil the surprise. Just go on MAME and look up Splash on the arcade. It's an interesting one, put it that way. And as kids, we probably shouldn't have been playing it, but we put a couple of quid in and we clocked it. So good fun.
See, you're kind of. I don't, without realising, I think you're kind of fighting my corner here, because you're bringing back all these memories that are making you smile and laugh about being in arcades, and that is something that kids of today aren't having.
Well, it's like Simon said. I think we were made of sterner stuff, and the attraction of going to them is that, like, it was a place we shouldn't have been in, and we didn't get access to those arcades till we went on holiday. So we wanted to be there, regardless of the bullies and the muggers, regardless of the dodgy bloke in the corner constantly puffing on his fags and reading a copy of the Racing Post. You know what I mean? It was just like we didn't care. We really didn't care, because we had our games, and as long as we were focused on those games, whatever went on in the peripheral vision, we just didn't care about.
You're right there, yeah.
Roy Sterini says arcades lost the appeal for him when the 8-bit style classics disappeared. Yeah, I think everyone's got their era when it comes to the arcades, and everybody's got a slightly different era. I've always kind of been all-encompassing. You know, I was there at the very start. I remember seeing Space Invaders arcade machines when I was younger. I know it was out, you know, in 1980, but they were still heavily in arcades come the late 80s, and that was when I was, you know, mostly playing my arcade games. And, you know, so I've got a lot of love for those. But, yeah, I think I continued to enjoy arcades right up to the turn of the century easily, you know. I think I could appreciate a little bit of each. It was just a natural part of growing up for me as I grew up, so the games grew up with me, you know, whereas now everything's looked about the same for about the last 20 years. There's been no big graphical leaps, there's been no big technological leaps. All we've had is slight increments in performance, you know. Simon Butler says he wasn't impressed with the arcades in Soho. Okay. So you were going to say something then, Neil?
No, I was just going to say, like Royce Turini said, you know, for me as well, a lot of the charm is in the old, you know, the old 8-bit graphics and the 8-bit sounds, and the theme tunes from those old arcade machines, you know, are still in my mind to this day. And as graphics and sound have got better, I think some of that charm's lost, because although some games these days sound amazing, I can't remember the tunes to any of them, you know, and like you say, the graphics all look, you know, everything looks very similar. There's nothing, you know, all the 3D games look similar to me.
Yeah, there's nothing really stand out, is there?
No, but I can stand in, you know, if I stood somewhere with a load of old arcade machines, I could probably hear just a little snippet of a tune and tell you straight away what it was, because it's, you know, ingrained in my mind, because it was just so, you know, I was so impressioned by these amazing games and the sounds, you know, and I don't even know how they made the tunes to be so catchy. It's just brilliant.
It was really good. I mean, a lot of the places used to hire in-house sound teams, you know, so it makes sense that they managed to create good original soundtracks for them. Alan Chang says one of the arcades in Soho closed down for a while due to triad-related murder, where someone was set on fire with petrol. Well, that's a bit of a story there, Alan. That makes some of the arcades I went to seem positively pale by comparison. That's quite a story. I mean, I can imagine that being the case. I mean, even some of the seaside towns. One thing I learned is apparently a lot of the Blackpool arcades. Obviously, Blackpool's quite a popular place for arcade gamers. The majority of the arcades on the front are owned by one and the same family, and they're not exactly the nicest people on earth. And there's been stories of them running people off, you know, the territory and things like that. I don't want to speak too much for other people, but I can imagine that anybody trying to start something new up, even in any kind of entertainment form, at Blackpool now, from what I understand, would be kind of hard pressed to get it past these guys. So there's definitely, it's like anything now, whenever there's money involved, especially gambling, there's always going to be the involvement of, you know, small time gangsters and things like that. I can imagine that's why a lot of arcades got their bad rep originally, because an arcade was never just a video arcade, it was a full amusement arcade. You had your fruit machines and everything, and whenever there's gambling, there's always going to be some kind of corruption. You can't get away from that fact. How much you're exposed to it, though, is down to obviously the machinations of the arcade owner, you know, and what their intentions are. I think that's probably why a lot of the inner city arcades, especially the independent ones, not so much places like Quicksilver, which were like, you know, the first chain that I remember that did the fruit machine arcades, but especially the independent arcades, I would imagine they got a lot of heat from local gangsters and things like that, because it might have been an easy way to launder money, or it might have been an easy way to conceal other things, because people already knew these places were seedy, and I imagine a lot of things went on in back rooms that you wouldn't realise.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm glad I stayed in the open front bit.
Yeah, I much prefer those ones. And I mean, think about it. I mean, if you've ever been to any of the arcades on a fair, the travelling fair that used to come around here, everybody knows what goes on a fair. The arcades used to have coin mechs that were designed to not reject your money and not add credits, and they'd never give you your money back. They'd have fruit machines that wouldn't pay anything out. bulbs have been missing. They were very poorly maintained, and it wasn't done purely because they didn't have the money to do it. It was done to rip you off. You know, they knew exactly what they were doing. I remember putting my money into arcade machines. Final Fight was one of the big sorest points because you'd put your money in and you could move your character, but none of the buttons worked. So you then put your money in and try to play a two-side, and the same was true on that side, and that's not accidental, you know, and there'd never be anyone around, any kind of attendant to try and help you out, because I just didn't care.
No, just taking money for nothing.
Yeah. Simon Butler gives you a clue there as to what Splash is all about. Alan Chang says the original arcade version of Puznik that Ocean released also had a dodgy version. Yeah, I can believe it. There's more than a few games like that. And Alan Chang says, I hope Arcade Club Blackpool are okay. And I hope it's okay generally, Alan, because obviously that was due to open in March. And look what happened. The world turned upside down. We had our zombie apocalypse. And now, I mean, I haven't spoken to Andy recently. I need to have a chat with Andy, but I imagine he's probably he's going to have a game on his hands when it comes to running that one in Blackpool. Thankfully, he's got a lot to fall back on. You know, he's got two very popular places, and if Blackpool does fall through in any way, he's always got the Bury one and the Leeds one to fall back on, both of which are doing pretty well. Jason Birch says one of his earliest memories is dad and uncle going to the arcades at Rill, playing Battle 1 or Star Wars and being shown briefly what's happening because I can't see, being a short 4-year-old. Still playing Battle 1 and Star Wars, they have them in my overall hands down favourite. Yeah, definitely a lot of memories. Right, so we've chatted about that for a while, guys. I knew this would be a long subject because there's a lot to cover when it comes to the arcades. I mean, the arcades are something, it's where most of us, you know, began our gaming hobby, you know, because the arcades were the precedent by which all future gaming was set. For years, the attempts to bring the arcade experience home were, you know, that was the intention of all manufacturers. And so obviously we were going to kind of hold that dear to us. And it wasn't just about the games. There was something about the environment, and as weird and seedy as it was, there was something enticing about the place. And every kid you spoke to would talk about the arcades. Kids now, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, people are family men these days, and you take your kids there and you kind of want them to enjoy it, and they do. They go in to see the flashing lights. They do. But all they're taught from them is, give me some more money, I need to throw some more money into this one. And everyone still gets to come out pretty empty-handed, instead of having to go to some crappy gift shop or handing over 1 billion tickets to get some kind of Chinese tat, like you say, which just isn't very rewarding at all. I mean, I've over the years, I've tried to coach, like, my niece and nephews, you know, some of them got into the gaming, some didn't. My nephew loves a trip to Arcade Club, and he likes to go in the arcades on holiday, but he said 1 million times, you know, I mean, yes, they're spoiled by the fact they've got so much better performing games at home, so they don't seek the arcade in the way that we did to get the best gaming experiences, but going to Arcade Club is still 1 million times better for him than it is going to an arcade on holiday, because some of them are very poor showings. I've gone back to some seaside towns in recent years that I went to as a kid and gone to some quite popular arcades, and I've walked in, and rather than being replaced with all this redemption junk and mechanical stuff, they haven't even bothered to replace them. It's like all the video arcades have gone, they've replaced them with a few redemption machines, but then most of the place is empty. An arcade I could walk into when I was a kid, you couldn't see the walls for cabinets. Yeah. Arcades now, if I can see the wall, you haven't got enough in there as far as I'm concerned. You know, and like I say, they're better lit places, so it highlights that fact. And as flashy as these new machines are, I mean, yeah, you are right. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the fact they've been made safer. There's a lot to be said they're still pulling people in. But the truth is, if you were to open one of these arcades in an inner city now, would anybody go to it? No, I don't think they would, because they know they'd be if no one would actively go to an arcade full of redemption machines, because they'd know they were being ripped off. There's no reward for having been there. It's just a money pit, you know, and no one would
there's nothing to gain. Yeah, it's nothing to gain. It's just when you're on holiday now, it's just one of those places that you're dragged into by your kids because of the noises when you walk past. You know?
It's a novelty of being on a holiday. That's all it is. It's nothing more.
We actively used to go there to have fun and play games, and that's just dead.
It is. So on that mercenary note, then I think there's no other option, guys. It's just got to be the case that. I think we've frozen a little bit there, mate. See if it continues. Just in case it doesn't. 1 second. 1 tenterhooks. Yeah, that's right. The chat's frozen. Well, yeah, we are still going. Yeah. So on that mercenary note, people, I think we have no choice, and modern arcades definitely pale in comparison to the classic arcades. And so they're going in room 101. There's no two ways about it. It was inevitable. I don't think anybody could argue the toss when it comes to that. Modern arcades, they're just not the same places. They've got a cheek to be using the same decor as some of the classic arcades. You walk along Blackpool seafront and you see some of the big branding on there, and I think, how dare you call yourself that arcade when you're not even a shadow of what you used to be, you know.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm well chuffed for that. Thanks.
Yeah, well, it had to be done. It definitely had to be done. So, right. So Neil's got his own way. So I'm going to be moving on now, and I'm going to be moving on to my topic for this time, and hopefully, if we can stop freezing out. Sorry, we do seem to have a few technical problems. It always seems to be on a Friday. I might need to change my day from a Friday because I think we're having a few problems with a little bit of internet locking up. So let me just check the chat's still running. Yeah, it's okay. Right, so stick with us, guys. I apologise for the little bits of lags. As long as the sound is getting through, I'm okay to continue doing what we're doing. So the next subject we're going to be talking about is this, and it's keyboard gamers. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I have my own personal gripes with this, right? I understand, okay, we're in an age now where PC gaming is large, you know, PC gaming is, well, let's face it, it's massive. More people game on PC than probably at any point in the past. And obviously consoles are slowly catching up with the PCs, and games are becoming far more complex. You need more buttons to do it. But you got to remember that when it comes to gaming in general, and I can already see a few comments coming up on the chat already. They'll scroll up the screen in a minute. I absolutely hate the idea and the concept of playing games on a keyboard on a classic microcomputer. PC gaming I can kind of forgive because you tend to have the analog control with a mouse and a keyboard, and that works purely because of the type of games you're playing with it. But when it comes to playing action games on a keyboard, it's just alien to me. I kind of understand where it comes from, but at the same time, I can't really forgive it. And I see it a lot at events especially. People go to a computer, and even though we've put out nicely serviced joysticks, they're put to one side, and people will automatically walk up and they'll say, no, I don't want that in the way. Pull that keyboard towards them, spilling over points and pulling cables. I want that keyboard to play a game. And it baffles my brain, right? When the original I kind of get it in the UK, right? When the first gaming systems arrived, they tended to be the home micros, right? But all except for the Spectrum, right, had joystick ports on them. Generally speaking, most of them had joystick ports. A joystick was designed to be a tactical interface between a person and a game, a highly responsive motion, a functional mechanical piece of kit that allowed you to interface more directly with what you were seeing on a screen. A keyboard was designed to type on. And let's face it, the keyboard, I know the Spectrum didn't have a joystick port. You had to do it via an interface, which was obviously an extra expense. But the keyboard on the Spectrum 48K is horrible. So Tell me, it is. Tell me, explain this to me. What's the appeal with it?
Well, I mean, I can see it from both sides really, because when I first had my Specky, it was the 48K one, and so I started off playing on a keyboard. So I can see the little animation you've got there. It's got Chucky Egg on. I can't play Chucky Egg on a joystick. I just, and a lot of the old games I just can't play on a joystick. You just don't seem to have the accuracy as if you've got your fingers on the keyboard. I don't know why that is. Maybe I just thought that was me, but when I eventually did get an interface and I bought a joystick, I could see the benefits of that as well. There's games that, I was infinitely better at because of the joystick. So Daley Thompson's Decathlon, for example, I found that much easier waggling left to right and tapping on the rubber keys. And most of my games I did play on a joystick at home. But I'm one of those people now that if I go to an event, like you said, I'll drag the keyboard. And I don't know why that is. I don't know. I guess it's just because I feel more in control. Like the joystick might be an interference, but a lot of the events have game pads now rather than the old style joystick, and I struggle to use those because I've got a little bit of pain in my thumbs. So I really struggle to use those for a period of longer than 5 or 10 minutes. So I always revert back to the keyboard, but I don't know. It just feels like you're at a lower level of the machine on a keyboard.
Is that what it is?
I think so. Every press is, you feel you're getting an accurate representation of what you want to do. Whereas a joystick feels like it might be getting in the way, or you might, one of those games where pushing it up makes you jump, and you accidentally, push it up when you're trying to move it left and right, and you jump into something and it kills you. And it's no fault of your own. It's just because you moved it slightly that direction, where you'll never get that with a keyboard.
I understand that argument. There's definitely certain games that will play better on a certain type of control and all that. And your comparison there of a joystick with a joypad is an interesting one, because I've got some quite strong opinions on that. But that is more to do with the game design than it is around the actual the interface and experience of the human and the computer. I just feel that, whereas some people might prefer a joypad to a joystick, going from a joystick to a keyboard was designed with one purpose in mind. With keyboards, you've got problems with blocking, with ghosting. You've not got a tactical response, especially on a membrane keyboard. You haven't got a proper tactical response because you've got no physical micro switch involved in it, whereas on micro switch you've got a positive click. It's a bit like trying to play, if you've ever tried playing any kind of classic game on a touch screen, you've got no physical response without having to look at your fingers as to where your hands are placed. Yes, you've kind of got that with a keyboard, but you've got no idea of what level you're pressing the key unless you actually see it on the screen. And I mean, Chucky Egg's probably a bad example, because I kind of get where you're coming from on that. It's a four-way game where you climb ladders and you move left and right. And if my experience of playing Donkey Kong is anything to go by, Donkey Kong, the arcade Donkey Kong especially, obviously that only ever had a proper dedicated four-way joystick. It was impossible to hit a diagonal, and that was how they got around the fact that obviously if you were to hit a diagonal, the game might be confused as to what direction you're pushing, and you might accidentally walk down a ladder or not walk down a ladder when you need to. And I can understand that being a problem, but obviously that they mechanically restricted it so you couldn't accidentally hit a diagonal, and that allowed you to play it better. On a keyboard, obviously there's no way you could accidentally do that, because you've physically got 4 fingers on 4 separate keys, so you would only go that way if you accidentally tap that. I do understand where you're coming from with regards to that. My argument would be, though, is the response time. I mean, some keyboards would definitely be better than others. I've been doing a lot of Spectrum Next streaming recently, a lot of reviews, and I did actually mention that they've done an arcade emulator, RAMs, for the Spectrum Next. And I actually commented on there, because I didn't actually have my joypad or anything hooked up. I was playing using the cursor keys. Now, that's not too bad, because the cursor key layout, the standard keyboard cursor key layout, is very intuitive in that you can play it with one hand, You can keep your fingers on left and right constantly. You can keep a thumb on a separate key in decent reach, and you can play it that way. And I was playing Donkey Kong that way, and I found I could play it really well. When it comes to the Spectrum keyboard, though, especially the original Spectrum 48, every key is identical. There's no different key. So when it comes to tactile response, not only have you got a feel for where you are, you might accidentally end up hitting a key next to it if you're leaning your fingers wrong, because you could forget where your kind of hand is placed unless you're looking at the keyboard. And one thing, I know you say like it feels more intuitive, but everybody who does step up at an event and plays on a keyboard, I've noticed while they're playing the games, they're constantly re-looking at their hands and readjusting. You don't have to do that with a joypad or a joystick because it all feels the way it's supposed to be. And if you look at the evolution of games, we haven't gone back to keyboards, and there's a very good reason for we haven't gone back to keyboards. It's because a joypad or a joystick is the more appropriate controller for it. The joystick and joypad thing I fully understand, because what I was talking about, the Donkey Kong as an example, it's very difficult to play a four-way game on a joypad because you inevitably hit the diagonals, and it makes for a very uncomfortable feeling game unless you've got a game that has been specifically programmed to account for that. A good example actually is my own game on the Spectrum, Next Revival Survival, and games like Bomberman on the SNES. The way they've done the programming on that, you could accidentally walk around corners on that if you weren't specifically pressing directly up, down, left or right. But if you program it correctly, you can actually snap yourself around corners. It can be programmed to ignore the diagonals, and it can make for a more fluid experience. So that kind of it nullifies that effect somewhat. But yeah, there's certain games that feel better. Fighting games, for example, will always feel better on an arcade joystick. But I do still know people who will prefer a joypad because they prefer the smaller motion with their thumbs. I'm like you, I've got problems. Obviously, my left hand doesn't work very well because I had a stroke. And my hand works okay, but I've got very poor fine motor control. So I can handle a joystick really well with my left hand because I can use my whole arm to operate it. Whereas using a D-pad now, my thumb doesn't work very well, so I would really struggle with that. So I'll get your argument with that. Just out of interest, playing on a keyboard now with this left hand is an impossibility. I just cannot get the tactile response I need. One-handed with the right hand, no problem, but left-handed, almost impossible. And I'm going to address the comments really quick here because this has already been quite a long video as it is, and people are raising points here straight away. They're immediately relevant. So Alan Chang says QAOP bitches. Yeah, I totally get that. People are going to say that. Simon Butler he says it is more of a generational thing. Yeah, I think there's an element of definitely of what you're used to. If you grew up playing a certain thing, but then again, it's like, why make things difficult for yourself? We might have all rode around like the Flintstones at one point, using our feet to control our cars, but the internal combustion engine was made to make getting around that little bit easier, so why would you go back? Do you know what I mean? That's the way I see keyboard playing. I mean, speaking for yourself, Neil, I mean, do you ever play other home micros with a keyboard, or do you opt for the joystick?
Well, I don't play anything on PC or anything, so the only games machine I've got really, well, we've got a PlayStation, obviously, it wasn't, but the only other games machine I've got is the Spectrum Next, and I either play the games on that on the keyboard or with the little Mega Drive joypad that I've got. But again, I can't play that very long because of my thumbs. But I did buy a Cheetah Mac 1 joystick to play on games on that with, because that's what I had. Yeah, that's what I had years ago, but it unfortunately doesn't go up. So if you've got a game where you don't have to jump on that one, it's brilliant.
Well, what about, but surely you've played on other systems from the time, like, I think it's your mate there, Ollie, mentioned, I don't know if it's your friend, but he mentions, he says the keyboards on classic micros are crap anyway. He says with the Acorn Electron, the brake keys next to the cursor keys, which isn't a very good design. I'm sure that's true. I mean, have you ever played any games on like Commodore 64 on a keyboard, for example?
I've played them at events, but I've got an Acorn Electron myself, and I've played that I play games on that, but only on the keyboard. not on a joystick because I didn't have one at the time to test it with.
But so that is more a matter of convenience than it is about a preference.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and with this spec, that my first, I didn't have a joystick at the beginning, so it was out of necessity of that. So I guess it's just going back to what I'm comfortable with and what those drawing me back to those initial feelings of playing on a Specky, which was I was sat QAOP on the keyboard.
Well, Mike actually makes an argument there. I guess this is going to be as bad as a Spectrum Commodore argument. He says no way QAOP. It's AZKL is the one of choice.
What?
see this drives some equally strong opinions. And
get that man a joystick.
Well, Aaron says that keyboards are for poor people and the mentally ill, so that's a strong opinion. That's a strong opinion.
On both of those, so that's all right.
Alan Chang says he couldn't afford a Sinclair interface unit for his 128K, so stuck with the keyboard. Alan, you were lucky to get a 128K, mate. The first 128K I ever played would have been the Plus 2, which obviously was designed to be more of a gaming system. It had the 2 joystick ports on, didn't it? The Plus 2. So I can't really make that argument there. Yeah, I had 48. My original Spectrum wasn't mine; it was my brother's. We had the 48K Plus, and obviously it was a better designed keyboard and everything. I do like the keyboard on the 48 Plus. It still pales in comparison to how nice they've done it with the Next, obviously, but. Yeah, we had to have an interface, and frustratingly so, you couldn't. It was harder to get hold of the Kempston Interface 2. We had the Kempston Interface 1, which was a single joystick port interface, and obviously I used to play through that. And I only had one friend who had the dual joystick Kempston Interface port, so it was the only way we could actually play 2 players with 2 joysticks was that way. And that was frustrating as hell, because if we played something like what's the name of the game? Is it Swiv? No, not Swiv. The one where you've got the helicopter and the jeep. Do you know?
Silkworm.
Silkworm. Thank you. For some reason I always get those 2 names mixed up. And he always said, "Oh well, I'm using the joystick. You've got to use the keyboard." And I'll be like, I'll be so angry, having to be resort to the keyboard. Nobody I knew wanted to play on keyboard. And I couldn't imagine any other way of playing things like Hypersports and things like that. I mean, my brother broke a million joysticks playing Hypersports, playing Decathlon, playing Super Test, and yeah, it was strange. But you could always get a faster response because it was much quicker to throw left and right than it was to physically lift up and down and press 2 buttons. That's been proven. And if you ever get a hold of MAME and use an arcade, you remap the controls to an arcade joystick and wiggle that joystick, and you watch how fast your meter increases. It's just a far more intuitive control. I hate playing the arcade version of Hypersports because I can't, again, because I haven't got 2 good hands especially. I can't deal with the 2 buttons thing to run. So, but when I use one of my MAME cabinets and I map the controls to the joystick, I find I can once again play the game, and much better than anyone can do on buttons. So you could argue it's cheating a little bit, but on the home micros, obviously you had that option. I would never opt for a keyboard over a joystick. It does seem to split people, definitely. There's people here saying that your friend Gareth says Daredevil Dennis on the BBC, classic keyboard action, the first game he ever played at school during wet break times. When it was raining, not when he wet himself, just to clarify. Yeah, okay. I'm not familiar with that game. What's that about, Daredevil Dennis? Do you know that one?
I don't think I've seen that one. No.
You'll have to enlighten us, Gareth. Put it in the comments after the chat. But yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of examples where a joystick probably does work better. Gareth throws a curveball in there. He says keyboards, joysticks, paddles for the win. It's interesting you say that because, in the arcades, they used to innovate a lot more, and I love a trackball. I absolutely love a trackball in the arcades. And playing something like Centipede or Missile Command, absolutely brilliant. Love playing with a trackball, and once you get to work with it, you know what I mean. It's once you get to grips with it, it's a really good way to play games. Some people can't kind of grasp them. Once you get a nice feel from them, and once you've got a well bedded in trackball, it's a really good way to play games. There's actually some games that would play better with different controls. If you think about, I mean, we're going off track a bit here, but think about Time Pilots, where obviously you can face in any direction. There's actually a mod you can get for MAME that will actually adjust the controls so you can map a spinner, a proper dial spinner, to control your ship, and it makes for a much better game. It's a wonder they never went down that road with it, to be honest. But yeah, there's a few people doing these mods a few years ago. I remember downloading it, and it plays so much better that way.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
I mean, well,
go on, mate.
Yeah, back in the day when I had my spec and my mates come around, we only had the one interface, so it would be one on the joystick, one on the keyboard, and it would always be me on the keyboard. Whether that was out of me being kind and letting somebody play on the joystick, I don't know, but I guess that's why I'm quite happy to play on the keyboard, because I just spent so much time doing it.
Yeah, I suppose the more practice you have with something, the better you're inevitably going to get. It's always just baffled me that why, when you've got access to something that was, a joystick was purpose built as a device to be a gaming interface. A keyboard was built to type on it. It seems like just two things that are worlds apart. It'd be like me trying to use a broom to wash my face. You know what I mean? It seems counterintuitive. It just seems counterintuitive. It might improve my face a bit, I don't know, but it just seems counterintuitive to me that you go back. Ollie said, Nez, would you class yourself as a keyboard warrior?
I'm happy to use both. I think it's a curious one because I've always played on the keyboard and I've always played on the joystick, so I'm happy for both. But for me, I think it's just got to be. It's dependent on the game.
I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, Target Renegade, I always remember playing on the joystick, never on the keyboard. But I couldn't imagine playing Chucky Egg on a joystick, or Manic Mine or anything like that. It just feel wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for keyboards. I mean, and as obviously time went on, keyboard technology was already better at that point. It was just obviously Sinclair doing it the cheapest way. I mean, scrolling back up there, Mike Lee says, you think that's hard? He says his first computer was a ZX80. So I can only, yeah, exactly. So that's like trying to play a game on the touchpad on your microwave. You know what I mean? It's maybe someone should do that. Should interface a microwave touchpad onto a game.
Yeah, I'm not envious of that one.
No, definitely not. So you can see the argument that I've got there, and the Spectrum. Yeah. As much as people were familiar with it because it was people's first major home computer, the Spectrum keyboard was definitely not ideal for it. But yeah, as time went on, keyboards certainly became more. I mean, it wasn't for the purpose of games; it was for the purpose of typing, obviously more than anything. But as keyboard layouts improved, they started to move them around. They became more ergonomic. You had a more sensible cursor key layout and things like that. They definitely became more, more accessible, I suppose, is the best way of putting it. And I've got to be honest, I mean, this is an argument. I'm not struggling for ideas put forward for Room 101, by the way, guys. It's just how it happens that this was something I wanted to bring up, seeing as how we had a Spectrum man on. So I was saving this one for Neil because I knew this was something he might have a few opinions on. But yeah, keyboard gaming, it definitely does have its place. I mean, keyboards are something you're not going to get away from. As long as computers exist, you'll have some kind of keyboard, even if it's a virtual keyboard. It does sadden me a little bit that modern devices don't have any kind of physical tactile controls, and I think everyone can agree that when it comes to mobile gaming or touchscreen gaming in general, even with the games that are designed for it, it's not an ideal way to play games, in my opinion. You need something physical between you. You need to feel something, and a touchscreen is always going to give you the problem that it feels the same all the way across it. You certainly can't tap it and use like a D-pad like you can for the kind of action games that we enjoy. And even those games that are designed for them, they tend to be very simplistic, mainly because they, the games that are designed, because you've got to use gestures, you tend to cover the whole screen with your hand, or you have to tap in certain locations, you couldn't have any kind of true control that way, I wouldn't say. Even though it's an analog experience now, we've got capacitive touchscreens. It's certainly not a way I want to see gaming going. But yeah, I mean, if I had to make a choice between touchscreens and keyboards, it'd be a keyboard every time. If I have a choice between keyboard and joystick, yeah, it depends on the game. I think you're right, Neil. Go on, you were going to say something, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, where would you stand on more modern stuff where, like, well, I say more modern stuff like Half-Life or, Quake or Minecraft or something where you've got a mixture of a mouse and majority of the keyboard to move around?
Yeah, well, that's
infantry and stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. I can't argue there, although I've never really been able to get to grips with it myself, purely because things like first-person shooters aren't really my thing. I totally understand why keyboards are still got a place. I mean, ideally, you would have a mouse with more buttons available on it, or maybe a secondary thing that had a limited number of, something that was more intuitive to your left hand, maybe. But obviously, when you've got a keyboard there in front of a typical computer, and you've got a mouse in front of a typical computer, you can see as they've evolved designs, they've designed them to evolve around the fact they're now going to be dual purpose. They're not just for clicking on a screen, they're now for analog control in games. The latency is becoming reduced on things like a wireless mouse. Keyboard response times are faster, they're more ergonomic. So you know what, guys, I'm going to concede on this one. I think this is the first point actually I've actually conceded on, and I'm actually not going to put keyboard gamers in room 101. So tonight, guys, you're seeing something you're not going to see very often, but Neil's entirely got his way because he's put forward a decent case, and because more of you have come on here now to give your opinion, I'm able to form a more balanced opinion. And you know what, gaming on a keyboard, I'd be lying if I said I never did it myself. I do it. I've done it recently, and I've realised when it can be useful. And as much as I will never really adapt and become a PC gamer, because I'm just not a big fan of first-person shooters in general, and that seems to be where the big trends are coming in the AAA games. I understand why it's the better interface for it. I've played Doom that way, and obviously Doom's a 30-year-old game now, and it is the best way to play it. I love playing it on the PlayStation, but I do struggle with shoulder buttons. They're great for strafing and things like that, but I do struggle with shoulder buttons. And playing on a keyboard and mouse, you do feel like you've got a lot more control, especially when you look at Quake and you're dealing with the third dimension. You're not just turning left and right, you're looking up and down. You need that analog control, and you need the digital control paired with it, so that works perfectly well. And I couldn't see PC games being any other way. Yeah,
I can't play a shooter with like on a PlayStation. I just can't get my head around the controls. It's just it's too crazy. I need a keyboard to move backwards, forwards, and left and right. I haven't played them for years, but I couldn't imagine playing Half-Life on a dual pad or something like that. It just seems bonkers to me. But I think the argument that you put forward, Craig, I think it was sort of conceded when you said that you see people at events putting the joystick to one side and putting the keyboard towards them.
Yeah, it's strange to me, and it wouldn't be my way of choice. It's a difficult one for me because I am wrestling with a disability, which makes sways my argument, and I'm more of an arcade gamer anyway, so I much prefer a joystick these days. I mean, I play, especially with being able to build main cabs and stuff these days, I love to play console games with a joystick much more than I do with a joypad these days, because I can get more to grips with an arcade joystick than I can with a joypad. And there are a lot of console games that play better with a joystick, and obviously you never would have really had access to back in the day. Not just fighting games. I've played Sonic with a joystick and an arcade joystick and buttons, and it plays band anyway. They were bringing arcade games home, so you would have played them in the arcade on a joystick first. Those type of games, so it makes sense. But keyboard gaming, guys, has been saved for today, so that's definitely a rarity. But I think it's a worthy one because everybody loves a Spectrum. I grew up on the Spectrum, and even though I never owned the rubber key one myself, I know why people do it. I only got an appreciation for it in recent years. It's not the logical choice for me, but it's definitely got its place, and it's definitely something I'd like to keep going. I think it'll be a sad day when I walk into an event and I see someone demand a joystick when they're playing a Spectrum. I've seen events where they don't put a joystick out at all with a Spectrum 48, and nobody ever complains. Nobody ever complains, because most people who want to go and play that Spectrum have at some point, or continue to do so, will play on that keyboard. That ugly, rubbery keyboard. I've never been a big fan of it, but you know what? It's an idiosyncrasy of the system. It's just part of its charm, and it's something obviously people like to do, and people will continue to do. So I can't really argue on that one. Right then, guys. So excellent. This has been a long episode. It's been an hour and a half. They're getting longer each time. I think we're just finding, as more and more people join these streams, to have more input and finding more to talk about. But yeah, it's great to hear other people's opinions on this. And Neil, you've been a brilliant guest, mate. Thank you for joining me tonight. You've had some really good input.
Craig. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, mate. No problem anytime. And I know you were a bit nervous about doing these live things, but you do your videos and you're good at them, so continue to do so. For any of you guys who've never had much experience with Neil before, he's got a Facebook page and a YouTube channel called Spectrum NES. He's done some pretty cool videos on there. He's a regular at events and things like that. So if you're looking for something to subscribe to, please go and find him on YouTube. That is where he hangs out most of all, with all his seedy friends. he hangs out on YouTube. But yeah, go and find Neil's channel, subscribe to that, and please subscribe to mine if you're only on Facebook. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be doing a bit more there soon anyway, and I'm trying to build that channel up for the sake of exposure to more people. So, but that's it for episode 4, guys. I will be back on Tuesday next week. I've got a couple of guys lined up for next week who haven't actually confirmed yet the exact days they're doing it, but I will be back on Tuesday, and I'll hopefully continue to do these on a Friday. I might move it to a Thursday if I absolutely have to. If I continue to get technical problems, I might have to do it. But for now, guys, anyway, signing off. Enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy the rest of your weekend.